Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Advanced React WordPress Theme Development. In this video, we will talk about one of the most important things, which is SEO. We're going to add the SEO component for the Next.js, and we are going to get the data from the Yoast plugin in WordPress. Now, how do we do that? So if you take a look at the plugins, you will notice that we have got a couple of plugins installed here related to SEO. One is your Yoast SEO, and then the next one is WP-GraphQL SEO. So this plugin basically allows us to query the fields for the SEO. Okay. And before we jump on to that, there's just a couple of updates we need to do. The first thing we're going to do is basically go to our backend, go to WordPress composer.json file, and we are going to update our headless CMS plugin to 1.2.0, and then we're also going to do the GraphQL to 1.0.1. Okay, and then all you have to do is just come in over here, and then if you go to the feature YouTube tutorial, you will get the option that in case if you make any changes to the composer JSON file, you just need to run this command to go ahead and update your package.json. Okay, so what you need to do is just hit this. I'll stop the development server and make sure you are in the root of the project, which is this, and then hit this command. This is going to go ahead and bring the composer, bring the Docker containers down. So what this is going to do, this is going to stop all of the containers, and it's going to go ahead and run the composer install again to update those packages. Okay, and then it's going to start the containers once again. So while it's doing its job, let's continue about what we need to do. Apart from this, we need to install a couple of packages. So I'm going to go over to my pull request where I've made the changes. So for the most part of the video, I will be doing copy pasting from the pull request that I've created for this project, because that way we can move faster. And now we can go to the front end, so cd front end, and I'm going to install a couple of packages. So I'll do yarn add next-seo, and then we also need to have the prop types. So next-seo basically is a package for adding the meta tags for SEO. So if you take a look, there's a package available on npm called next-seo, and if you click on it, you can see that it's got over 55,000 installs per week. So it's pretty popular package, and all you can do is just import it, and then you can use this component to add the title, description, and all of the OG tags as well. Okay, canonicals and stuff like that. So that's what we're going to do. The next thing we're going to do is basically get the query that we want to run for a particular page. Okay, so we're going to start with the home page. So for home page, make sure that you have your home page set over here. So make sure you go to the customize home page setting and set your home page over here. Okay, and just to show you that if you go to pages and take a look, you can see that the home page is already set. Currently it doesn't have any content, but it does have a featured image, and you can put whatever featured image you want. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the GraphQL, and if I want to get the page by, let me zoom it in. So for the home page, I'll get it at the root URL, and I can get the page, can get the ID. Let me get the ID, title, content, slug, URI, and then I can also get SEO. And then inside of the SEO, I can have the SEO fragment. So here's my SEO fragment. So I'm going to add the SEO fragment here, and then I'm just going to use the SEO fragment over here. Okay, and then I'm going to run it. Now you can see that inside of the SEO, we've not only got the breadcrumbs that we will be learning about in the upcoming videos, how to use them, but also we've got all of the meta tag data, which is title, meta description. You've got the open graph title, and then you've also got the schema details, right? So schema details is coming from the Headless CMS plugin that you have installed, and that actually adds the schema details field to the SEO, and this SEO field is actually coming from the Yoast SEO GraphQL plugin that we had installed and activated. Okay, and one more thing you need to do is go to HCMS settings and then make sure that you put your front-end site URL here. At the local development, this will be localhost 3000, but when you are into production, when you go live, it'll be something like example.com https://example.com. So that'll be your Next.js site URL, front-end site URL. Okay. So that is the information we are using here, because in the schema details, remember, for most part of it is going to use the backend URL, but we need to replace that with the front-end URL. That's why we are using that. Okay, so if you make any updates there, automatically the update will come over here as well. So if I change this to example.com and save it, you'll notice that the schema value is also changed to the example.com. So it's kind of going to replace the backend URL with the front-end one, and that's what we need for our schema, right? For SEO. Okay, brilliant. So we've got the query available. So what we're going to do is we'll go ahead and add this query. So I'm going to head over to the front end, and inside of the front end we'll go to queries. Inside of the fragments, we'll create a directory called SEO. Inside of SEO, I will create a file called index.js, and all I'm going to do is just go ahead and use this SEO. So I'm going to copy paste to save time. Here we go. I'll just copy this. So we've got the SEO fragment. Okay, now we need to use this SEO fragment into our page query. So we have got this pages and we've got get page. So inside of get page, we need to update our query to have the SEO as well. So I'll put that here. Okay, so you've got the SEO here. And next thing we want to do is we will create a component for the SEO. So we will go to our component and we'll go ahead and create a component called SEO. And inside of this, we'll create a file called index.js. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy the SEO component for you, and then I'm going to explain to you what's happening inside of it. Okay, so let me go ahead and copy that. Okay, so what's happening here? Let's take a look. We are importing the Next.seo from the Next.seo package that we've just installed. We are getting the prop types from the prop type package that we have just installed over here, and we're using prop types to define the required prop type for the SEO component, and then also the default prop types. So we get the shape what is expected here. Okay, and then what we're doing over here is we need to pass the SEO data. So this SEO data will actually be coming from GraphQL. So if you go over here, you can see that this is the SEO data, right? So it's going to pull all of this data, which is title, meta description, all of that stuff. And then for canonical and stuff, because it will contain the backend URL, we are replacing the backend URL with the front-end URL that you would mention for your own site here. And it's going to pull that up, and then it's just going to use that. In case if that is not available, it'll use the current location for the root URL. So this is just to prefix the root URL before the URI that forms your URL for the canonical. So that'll be whichever page you are on, that'll be the URL prefixed by your root URL of the site. Okay, and then I'm using this next-seo component, just passing all of these attribute, and then I'm passing all of these props. We also have the open graph. So if you take a look, You have your open graph, right? That's the documentation of this package. So I'm just passing all of these data dynamically, and you can update this to your own as well, passing the source URL, the title, the GraphQL URL. So all of the data that we get actually from the Yoast SEO plugin is being passed over here, which is great. And then I'm just exporting this component so I can use it. So let's go ahead and put this component now. So before we use that component, we just need to make some updates. So if we go on to pages, remember that inside of the slug.js we have got this pages component. This should actually be page and not pages. And we're just getting this data currently router.query.slug.join. I think we can just replace it with the layout because we already have the layout component, right? So we'll just replace that, and we're getting the data anyways here, right? So that's for the pages. So I've just updated the query to have it layout so that we can have menu onto any of our pages. So if you go on to running the npm run dev, and then if you go to the root URL, and then whichever page you go on to now, you'll be able to have the menu, the header and footer menu, because we have put that in the layout. So let's go ahead and add that. And because we have passed this SEO fragment, we also need to add this SEO fragment here, which is SEO fragment. There you go. Now, if you check, we have the header and the footer. We've got the memories, all of these pages. Now, there is an issue here. As you can see that the content should have some kind of a minimum height. So we're going to quickly fix that before we continue. So if you go down at the bottom, we can actually extend our Tailwind config. So if you go to Tailwind config, and you can extend the height, and you can add another class so that you can do a calculation of whatever the full height of the page is minus 16 rem, and that's something you can use for your content height, right? So that's what you can use for the content height. What I'm going to do now is I'll just restart my development server, restart it, and then I'll go to the components, then layout, and then inside of that we have this children over here, right? So I'm going to wrap this children with a div, and I'm going to give it a class of h_almost_screen and put the children inside of it. So that way, now you can see that we've got some kind of a minimum height over here. So if you do inspect element, you'll see that that class has already been applied. This is our custom class. Okay, and now we have got this height being applied, which is great. Okay, awesome. Now the next thing we need to do is basically add the SEO component. So where should we add it? We ideally should add it inside of the layout. So let's go to the first thing we need to do is add the SEO component. So I'm going to add that. All right, I'll add just before the head, and I'm just going to pull it. There you go. So I'll pull the SEO component. So remember we created the SEO component, right, which is this one, correct? So we're just exporting it here and then importing it inside of a layout because our meta tags needs to be present on all of the pages. Okay. So then what I'm doing is I'm going ahead and checking if the page exists or not. Okay, so let me pull the is empty from top. Okay, so if you take a look at the data that we're getting, you can see that we've got the page by, but if you remember, we had done an alias in the query called, and we named it as page. So this will be data.page, right? Take a look at the query. We have aliased it as page. So that's why now we have it available as data.page. So that's what we are doing over here inside of this component. We are saying check if the page property exists inside of data. If it does, great, otherwise return null. And then we are passing the SEO out of it. So data.page.seo, which is this one, and that's what we're passing here, and then we're also passing the URI, which is root in this case. Okay, and the next thing we do is we also add the schema. So for the schema, let me add this piece of code. So inside of the head, we can add the schema. So in schema, it's going to be page.seo.schema details. So if you remember that we are getting the schema details here. So we are just going ahead and using that, and we also need to sanitize it. Okay, it's been pulled on top. Great. So we're adding a script. We're adding application LD plus JSON, Yoast schema graph, Yoast schema, and we're adding the sanitize method for the schema details, right? Awesome, great. And okay, we need to pull the page also, right? From the data, we need to pull the page, header, footer, menus, etc. So I'm going to get rid of the data. Yep, there you go. That should be good. All right. So if I console out the data for you, just to show you what's inside of it, inspect, take a look. So what we're doing is from the data, we are pulling the page, which is this. You've got everything in the page. We've got SEO, we've got the schema details and everything. And then we don't have any content, that's why content is null. We are pulling the header, footer, and the menu. So the header, the footer, and the menu, we're pulling all of that. And then we're just passing it to the relevant components. So inside of the header, we pass the header menu, we pass the footer menu inside of the footer component. And then we are passing the schema here, and we're also passing the SEO data to the SEO component. Brilliant. And now if you go ahead and check the elements, and then if you click on head, congratulations, brilliant. You can see that you've got all of the meta tags available. You've got Twitter card, Twitter creator, OG URL. So you can see that you've got front-end URL here, and that's the URL that we see, right? OG title, OG image. We've got the canonical as well over here, right? And we've got the schema. Okay, you can see you've got all of the schema available, and that's great for SEO. And if you go to any other page, let's say I go to memories, you'll notice that that's dynamically changed. So now if you check, the title becomes memories, and then whatever the other title is, and then you've got canonical, that's changed now. OG URL is changed. Yeah, so the data is changing based on the page, and this is all going to be server-side rendered, so the data will already be available for Google for the SEO purposes. Okay, great, awesome. Now the next thing we need to do is, because we have created a home page with the root URL of /, so if you check, this is the root URL, right? But in Next.js, we already have an index page available. So if you check, Next.js is automatically going to create a route for you at the root, which is a /, right? And any other route, it should be catching that, and it should be creating the page for that using the get static paths that we have got dynamically. So if you check the get page URI, let me show you. So let me open this in another screen, and if you hit it, you'll see that these are the pages for which we are generating the pages dynamically using this query, right? And this also includes the root, the home, but we should ideally exclude it, otherwise it's going to create issues when we are building it. When we are doing the npm run build, then we are going to have issues because it's going to be clashing with this root URL that Next.js, with this route that Next.js already created, and then the route that we are trying to create over here. Okay, so what we need to do is basically create a function called is custom page URI, So I'm going to go to utils, and then I'm going to create a file called slugs, and then inside of this I'm going to add is custom page URI, and then pages to exclude, so I want to exclude the root, and then this is going to return true if the URI is any one of them mentioned in this array. Okay, and then I'm going to use this over here inside of the slug.js. So as you can see, we are checking if page.uri is not empty. You should also check not is custom page URI, and then I'm going to pass page.uri over here. So what this is going to do is going to check if it's not one of the custom page URIs, then go ahead and create that dynamically. So it's going to skip this root URL that we have added over here, which is exactly what we want. Okay. So last thing we want to do is go to the index.js, and remember that we are getting the data over here, but we've not pulled up the page. So we'll pull up the page also and pass that as a page over here, and then we are already doing that inside of the slug.js, so we already have the page available here, which is awesome. Great. So that's about it. So I hope you did like the video. If you did, please give a thumbs up and do subscribe to my channel if you aren't already. And please do give star to my repository like all these beautiful 37 people have. All right. And do follow me on GitHub. My GitHub handle is imranhsayed, and do follow me on Twitter as well. And my Twitter handle is Codeytek. All right. So I'm going to see you in the next video, and thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye.